Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's get started. The neon sign outside WZAP, 103.7 FM Channel 12 local access flickered against the October night, its orange glow casting long shadows across the cracked parking lot. Inside, the station buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that only Halloween could bring. Paper bats dangled from the ceiling. A plastic skeleton leaned against the reception desk, and the faint smell of pumpkin spice candles mixed with the ozone tang of old electronics. At the center of it all sat Jack Reynolds, the voice of Ashford, Ohio. Mid-40s, square-jawed, with a radio baritone that could make even a weather report sound like gospel. He adjusted his tie in the reflection of the studio glass, smoothing back his salt and pepper hair. "All right, folks," he said into the mic, his tone rich and playful. "Welcome to our Halloween special. Ghost stories, candy counts, and maybe a few tricks along the way." Behind the glass, Claire Monroe, the station's producer, tapped her pen against a clipboard. Sharp-eyed, efficient, and perpetually caffeinated, she kept the show running like clockwork. "Keep it light, Jack," she mouthed, though her smile betrayed amusement. In the corner, Tyler, the college intern, adjusted cables with fumbling hands. Dressed in a half-hearted vampire cape, he was eager but green, his headphones slightly too big for his head. "Levels are good," he muttered, though his voice cracked with nerves. The broadcast rolled on. Jack read listener emails about haunted houses and local legends, the Ashford Witch, the ghost train that supposedly roared through town every October 31st. Claire queued up sound effects, creaking doors, howling winds, a distant scream that made Tyler jump. The phone lines lit up with callers sharing their own spooky tales. Outside, the town was alive with Halloween. Trick-or-treaters darted between porches, their costumes glowing under streetlights. Parents laughed, neighbors handed out candy, and the crisp autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves. For a moment, Ashford felt like the safest place in America. Then the first call came in. The line crackled, and a woman's voice, breathless and panicked, filled the studio. "Jack? Jack, are you there?" Jack leaned forward, his tone still smooth but curious. "You're live on WZAP. What's your name, ma'am?" "Linda. I'm at the hospital. Something's happening. People are screaming. They're—" Her voice broke into static, then returned higher, sharper. "They're attacking each other." Claire's eyes shot up from her clipboard. Tyler froze, his hand hovering over the soundboard. Jack forced a chuckle, trying to keep the mood light. "Sounds like quite the Halloween party, Linda. Maybe too much punch." But Linda's voice was deadly serious. "No, it's not a party. They're biting people. Oh, God!" A scream erupted through the line, followed by a crash. The call went dead. Silence filled the studio. Claire leaned into the mic switch. "Cut that. We can't air prank calls." But Jack's instincts told him otherwise. He cleared his throat, his tone shifting from playful to measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we seem to have some unusual reports coming in from Ashford General Hospital. We'll keep you updated as we learn more." Tyler whispered, "That didn't sound like a prank." Claire shot him a look. "It's Halloween. People get carried away." Still, unease settled over the studio. Jack shuffled his notes, his hands suddenly less steady. He glanced at the police scanner on the desk, its static hissing like a warning. Then, faint but clear, a dispatcher's voice cut through. "Unit 12, respond to Ashford General. Multiple disturbances, possible assaults, backup requested." Jack's eyes met Claire's through the glass. The playful tone of the night was gone. He leaned into the mic, his voice lower now, edged with tension. "Folks, we're hearing reports of disturbances at the hospital. We don't have details yet, but please, stay safe out there. Keep your radios on. We'll bring you the latest as it comes. Outside, the laughter of trick-or-treaters still echoed through the streets, but inside WZAP, the air had shifted. The Halloween special was no longer just about ghosts and legends. Something real was happening in Ashford. And it was only beginning. The red on-air light glowed above the studio door, bathing the cramped room in a warning hue. Jack Reynolds leaned closer to the microphone, his voice steady but edged with unease. Ladies and gentlemen, we're monitoring reports of disturbances at Ashford General Hospital. We don't yet know the cause, but we'll keep you informed. Behind the glass, Claire Monroe's pen tapped furiously against her clipboard. She was already on the phone, her voice clipped. Yes, Chief. We heard it too. Can you confirm? She scribbled notes, her brow furrowed. Tyler sat frozen at the soundboard, his vampire cape bunched around his shoulders. That didn't sound like a prank, Jack, he whispered. Jack gave a curt nod, his eyes flicking to the police scanner. Static hissed. Then a dispatcher's voice cut through. Unit 14, multiple assaults in progress. Officers requesting backup. Suspects described as unresponsive to commands. Claire's eyes widened. Unresponsive. The phone lines lit up again. Jack gestured to Tyler. Patch it through. A man's voice, ragged and panicked, filled the studio. This is Carl from Maple Street. They're everywhere. My neighbor. He bit his wife. She's bleeding. The line dissolved into screams, then silence. Jack's professional calm cracked for the first time. He leaned back, his throat dry. Folks, we're receiving multiple calls of violent incidents across town. Please, stay indoors. Lock your doors. Claire muted her phone and leaned into the glass. Jack, the chief says the hospital's on lockdown. They're calling in every available unit. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with gravity. This is no longer a Halloween prank. Something serious is happening in Ashford tonight. The playful tone of the broadcast was gone. The studio filled with the sound of sirens outside, faint but growing louder. Through the window, Jack could see the glow of red and blue lights racing down Main Street. Claire patched in another call. This time it was a nurse, her voice trembling. They're not patients anymore. Oh God, they're attacking us. We can't stop them. They don't feel pain. We've locked ourselves in the supply room, but they're pounding on the door. The line went dead. Tyler's hands shook as he adjusted the dials. Jack, what do we do? Shouldn't we leave? Jack's jaw tightened. He looked at Claire, then back at the microphone. We stay on the air. People need information. If the town's falling apart, this station is their lifeline. Claire hesitated, then nodded. All right, but we need facts. No rumors. No hysteria. The police scanner erupted again. All units, be advised. Suspects are not responding to lethal force. Repeat, not responding. Officers down. Hospital perimeter breached. Jack's voice dropped to a near whisper. Not responding to lethal force. He straightened, his tone firm. Ashford, if you're listening, stay inside. Do not approach anyone acting violently. This is not a prank. This is real. The phone lines blinked again. All of them. Tyler stared at the board. There are too many. Which one do I take? Any of them, Jack said. One after another, voices poured through. Screams, pleas for help. Frantic descriptions of neighbors turning on neighbors. The soundscape of a town unraveling. Claire's face was pale, but her voice was steady. Jack, we can't air all of this. It's chaos. Jack shook his head. People need to hear the truth. They need to know what's happening. He leaned into the mic, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. This is WZAP, Ashford's voice. We are live, and we will stay live as long as we can. Something is happening tonight, something none of us understand. But you are not alone. Keep your radios on. We'll face this together. Outside, the sirens grew louder. The first faint moans drifted through the night air. carried on the wind. Inside the studio, the Halloween decorations suddenly felt grotesque, mocking. The paper bats swayed in the draft from the air vent, their shadows dancing across the walls like omens. The broadcast had begun as a game, a seasonal diversion. Now it was the only thread connecting a terrified town. And the thread was fraying fast. The studio's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow that felt at odds with the chaos bleeding through the airwaves. Jack Reynolds sat rigid at the microphone, his voice steady but his eyes betraying unease. "Ashford, we're staying with you tonight. Reports continue to come in from the hospital. Please, remain indoors." Behind the glass, Claire Monroe juggled two phones at once, her pen scratching furiously across her clipboard. "Yes, Chief, we're live." "Yes, we'll keep the line open." Her other hand gestured sharply at Tyler, who fumbled with the soundboard, sweat beading on his forehead. The police scanner erupted again. "Unit 9, officer down. Repeat, officer down at Ashford General and suspect. No, suspects. Multiple. They're biting." Jack's throat tightened. He leaned into the mic, his baritone carrying a weight it had never borne before. "Listeners, we've just heard confirmation of multiple assaults at Ashford General. Officers are down. I repeat, officers are down." The phone lines blinked like a Christmas tree. Tyler hesitated, then patched one through. A man's voice, ragged and frantic, filled the studio. "This is Dr. Patel. I'm in the ER. They're not human anymore. We sedated one, but he got back up. His heart wasn't beating, but he stood up. He tore through restraints like paper." Claire's eyes widened. "Doctor, are you saying—" The line exploded with screams. A woman shrieked, glass shattered, and the sound of something heavy slamming against metal filled the air. Dr. Patel's voice returned, high and panicked. "They're breaking through. God help us." The call cut to static. Silence fell in the studio, broken only by the hiss of the scanner. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of moaning. Not through the equipment, through the walls. Tyler's head snapped toward the lobby. "Did you hear that?" Claire froze, her pen hovering above the page. "It's probably just—" The moan came again, louder this time, followed by the crash of glass. Jack's instincts kicked in. "Lock the doors. Now." Tyler bolted for the lobby, slamming the deadbolt into place just as a shadow lurched against the glass. A pale face smeared with blood pressed against the window, its mouth opening in a guttural groan. Fingers clawed at the pane, leaving streaks of red. Claire's voice trembled. "They're here." Jack forced his voice steady, leaning into the mic. "Ashford, if you can hear me, the hospital is lost. The infection, whatever this is, has spread. We're seeing it firsthand. Do not go outside. Do not open your doors." The pounding on the glass grew louder. Tyler stumbled back, his cape snagging on a chair. The figure outside slammed its head against the window, again and again, until cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. Claire grabbed the fire axe mounted on the wall, her hands shaking. "If they get in—" Jack cut her off, his voice low but firm. "They won't. Not yet." The scanner crackled again. "All units. Ashford General is overrun. Repeat, overrun. Evacuate immediately. Containment failed." Jack's heart sank. Containment failed. He turned back to the mic, his voice carrying the weight of the town's unraveling. "This is no longer an isolated incident. Ashford General has fallen. The police are evacuating. If you're listening, lock your doors. Stay quiet. And pray." The pounding on the glass stopped. For a moment, silence. Then the sound of shuffling footsteps retreating into the night. Tyler exhaled shakily. "They're gone." Claire shook her head. "No, they're not gone. They're hunting." Jack's gaze lingered on the cracked glass, the bloody smears glistening under the fluorescent lights. He leaned into the mic one last time, his voice grim. Ladies and gentlemen, this is no Halloween prank. This is Ashford, Ohio, under attack. Stay with us. Stay alive. The on-air light glowed red, casting its warning across the studio. Outside, the first attack had begun. And it would not be the last. The pounding on the lobby glass had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. Every creak of the building, every hiss of the air vents felt like a warning. Inside WZAP, the Halloween decorations drooped in the stale air, their cheerful plastic grins mocking the fear that now gripped the room. Jack Reynolds sat at the mic, his voice low but steady. Ashford, this is WZAP. We're still here, we're not going anywhere, stay with us. His baritone carried calm, but his eyes betrayed the strain. Claire Monroe paced behind the glass, phone pressed to her ear. Yes, Sheriff, we've seen them. Yes, they tried the station, we're locked down. She scribbled notes, her hand trembling. Understood. I'll patch you through. She flicked a switch and the line clicked live. Sheriff Ruth Daniels's voice filled the studio, firm and commanding despite the chaos behind her. This is Sheriff Daniels. To anyone listening, stay inside. Do not open your doors. We're dealing with multiple violent incidents across town. Officers are stretched thin. The hospital is lost. Jack leaned into the mic. Sheriff, this is Jack Reynolds. Can you confirm what we're hearing? People say the attackers don't respond to pain, that they keep coming even after being shot. A pause. Then Ruth's voice. Grim. That's correct. We don't know what we're dealing with. Headshots seem to stop them, but nothing else works. If you're armed, aim for the head. If you're not, barricade and pray. Tyler's face went pale. He whispered. She said headshots. Claire shot him a look. Focus. Jack's voice carried the weight of the town's fear. Sheriff, what about the hospital staff? Survivors? Static crackled, then Ruth again. We've pulled who we could. Most didn't make it. We're regrouping at the high school gym. It's the largest secure building left. If you can get there safely, do it. Otherwise, stay put. The line cut with a burst of static. Jack exhaled slowly, then turned back to the mic. You heard her, Ashford. The hospital is gone. The gym is the fallback point. But if you can't reach it, lock your doors. Stay quiet. Stay alive. Claire muted the feed and leaned close to Jack. We can't keep doing this forever. If they breach the station... Jack cut her off, his voice low. Then we go down broadcasting. This is the only lifeline people have. Tyler swallowed hard, his hands trembling over the soundboard. What if they cut the power? Jack glanced at the backup generator in the corner, its red light glowing faintly. Then we run on fumes. But we don't go silent. The scanner erupted again. All units, multiple 1033S. Downtown is compromised. Repeat, downtown is compromised. Claire's pen froze mid-note. Downtown. Jack leaned into the mic, his voice grim. Ashford, if you're listening, downtown is lost. Stay away from Main Street. The pounding returned. This time not at the lobby glass, but at the side door. Heavy, deliberate thuds that rattled the frame. Tyler jumped, nearly knocking over his chair. Claire grabbed the fire axe again, her knuckles white. They're trying every entrance. Jack's voice dropped, steady but urgent. Ashford, we're under siege here at WZAP. If you can hear the pounding behind me, that's them. They're outside. They know we're in here. The thuds grew louder, more frantic. The doorframe groaned. Tyler's voice cracked. They're gonna get in. Jack stood, his hand on Tyler's shoulder. Not yet. Help me. Together they shoved a filing cabinet against the door, the metal screeching across the floor. Claire added a desk, then another chair. The pounding continued, but the barricade held. For now. Jack returned to the mic, his breath ragged. Ashford, we're barricaded inside the station. If you're listening, do the same. Block your doors. Don't wait. They're stronger than they look. The pounding stopped again. Silence. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. They're testing us. looking for weak spots. Jack stared at the glowing on-air light, its red glow steady. He leaned into the mic, his voice calm despite the fear clawing at his chest. "We're still here. And as long as this light is on, Ashford, you're not alone." Outside, the dead shuffled in the dark. Inside, the station held its breath. The lockdown had begun. The on-air light glowed red, casting its warning across the studio. Jack Reynolds leaned into the microphone, his voice steady but taut. "Ashford, we're still with you. We've locked down the station. Sheriff Daniels has confirmed the hospital is lost. Stay inside. Stay safe." Behind the glass, Claire Monroe's phone buzzed. She answered sharply, then her eyes widened. "Jack, it's Dylan Carter. He's outside. He's got a live feed." Jack's brow furrowed. "Patch him in." The monitors flickered, static giving way to shaky footage. Dylan's voice came through, breathless, the camera bouncing as he jogged down Main Street. "This is Dylan Carter, freelance videographer. I'm on Main, near the courthouse, folks. It's bad. Real bad." The image steadied, revealing the once bustling heart of Ashford. Halloween decorations fluttered in the cold wind. Candy bags lay scattered across the pavement. Cars sat abandoned, some with doors hanging open, headlights still on. And in the distance, figures. Dozens of them, staggering, their movements jerky and unnatural. Jack's voice dropped. "Ashford, you're seeing this live. This is not a drill." Dylan zoomed in. A man in a torn police uniform stumbled into view, his face pale, his eyes clouded. Blood streaked his shirt. He lurched towards the camera, mouth opening in a guttural moan. Claire whispered, "Oh my God." Dylan's voice trembled. "That's Officer Miller. I interviewed him last week. He's gone." The officer lunged. Dylan stumbled back, the camera jerking wildly, a gunshot cracked, echoing down the street. The officer collapsed, a deputy standing behind him, rifle smoking. The deputy shouted, "Get out of here! They're everywhere!" The camera swung, capturing the street as shadows poured from alleyways. Dozens of figures, their clothes torn, their faces smeared with blood. They moved with terrifying purpose, drawn by the noise. Dylan's breath came in ragged gasps. "They're coming from every direction, the whole street. Oh God, they're everywhere." Jack's voice cut in, calm but urgent. "Ashford, if you're listening, do not go outside. Main Street is lost. Stay in your homes." The footage shook as Dylan sprinted, the camera bouncing. He ducked into a storefront, glass crunching under his shoes. Through the window, the horde swarmed, pounding on doors, clawing at cars. Claire's voice was tight. "Jack, we can't keep showing this. It's too much." Jack shook his head. "People need to see. They need to understand." On screen, Dylan crouched behind a counter, his voice a whisper. They don't stop. They don't feel pain. They just keep coming. The moans grew louder, filling the studio speakers. Tyler flinched, his hands trembling over the soundboard. "It sounds like they're right here." Jack leaned into the mic, his voice grim. "Ashford, you're hearing the streets live. This is not rumor. This is not a prank. The dead are walking." The camera jolted again as Dylan bolted from the store, sprinting down an alley. The feed shook violently, then steadied as he climbed a fire escape. From the rooftop, the view widened. The town stretched below, bathed in the flicker of streetlights. Fires burned in the distance. Sirens wailed, then cut abruptly. And everywhere, figures, hundreds of them, moving through the streets, swarming cars, pounding on doors. Dylan's voice cracked. "Ashford is gone. The whole town, it's gone." Jack's throat tightened, but he forced his voice steady. "Ashford, if you can hear me, stay hidden. Do not draw attention. Help is not coming tonight." The camera lingered on the streets below, the horde spreading like a tide. Then Dylan turned the lens on himself, his face pale, sweat streaking his brow. "If anyone sees this, Don't come here. Don't try to help. Save yourselves. The feed cut to static. Silence filled the studio. Jack leaned into the mic, his voice low, heavy with finality. You heard him. Ashford is lost. But we are still here, and as long as this station stands, you are not alone. The on-air light glowed red. Outside, the streets of Ashford belonged to the dead. The fluorescent lights of Ashford High School's gymnasium buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Bleachers had been pulled out, not for a basketball game, but to corral frightened families. The Halloween decorations from earlier in the day, orange streamers, paper pumpkins, still clung to the walls, now grotesque reminders of a night gone wrong. Sheriff Ruth Daniels stood at the center of the gym, her uniform streaked with blood and soot, her shotgun slung across her chest. Her voice carried authority, cutting through the murmurs of panic. This is the safest place left in Ashford. We've got solid doors, reinforced windows, and enough space to keep everyone together. But we need order. Panic will kill us faster than they will. Jack Reynolds' voice carried her words live over WZAP's airwaves. From the safety of the station, he narrated what was happening, his baritone steady. Listeners, the sheriff has established a refuge at Ashford High. Survivors are gathering there now. If you can reach it safely, do so. If not, stay hidden. Claire Monroe patched the sheriff's radio into the broadcast, her fingers flying over the soundboard. Tyler adjusted levels nervously, his vampire cape now discarded in a heap on the floor. The gym was filling fast. Parents clutched children, teenagers huddled in groups, elderly residents sat trembling on the bleachers. The sound of crying echoed, punctuated by the occasional shout. Volunteers dragged tables to block entrances, stacking chairs against doors. Sheriff Daniels barked orders. Barricade the east wing doors. You, check the windows, and someone get me a count of how many we've got in here. A deputy jogged over, his face pale. We've got about 80, maybe more. But people are still coming in. The sheriff nodded grimly. Then we hold until they stop. Jack's voice narrated the scene for listeners. The gym is becoming a fortress. Sheriff Daniels is organizing defenses. Families are huddled together, waiting, praying. The fear is palpable, but so is the determination. Suddenly, the gym doors banged open. A group of survivors stumbled in, bloodied and gasping. One man clutched his arm, crimson soaking through his sleeve. He collapsed onto the floor, groaning. The sheriff knelt beside him, pulling back the fabric. A bite mark, deep and ragged, glistened in the harsh light. The gym fell silent. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with dread. Listeners, a man has just arrived with what appears to be a bite. The sheriff's jaw tightened. She stood, her voice firm. Everyone back. Now. The man's wife screamed, clutching his hand. Please, he's fine. He just needs a doctor. But the sheriff shook her head. You know what happens. We've all seen it. The man convulsed, his body jerking violently. His eyes rolled back, then snapped open, clouded, lifeless. He lunged, teeth snapping. Chaos erupted. People screamed, scrambling back. Deputies rushed forward, pinning him down. The sheriff raised her shotgun, her face grim. The blast echoed through the gym, rattling the rafters. The man's body went still. Silence followed, broken only by sobs. Jack's voice carried the moment live. Ashford, you just heard it. A man turned inside the gym. Sheriff Daniels ended it before he could spread it further. This is the reality we face tonight. The sheriff lowered her weapon, her voice steady but heavy. This is why we can't take chances. If you're bitten, you don't come in. If you hide it, you doom us all. The survivors stared. Fear etched into their faces. The gym no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a waiting room for death. Claire's voice was tight as she whispered to Jack. How long can they hold in there? Jack didn't answer. He leaned into the mic, his voice calm but grim. Ashford, the gym is holding. For now, Sheriff Daniels is doing everything she can, but the dead are at the doors and the night is far from over. Outside, the moans grew louder, pressing against the gym walls. Inside, 80 souls clung to the fragile hope that the sheriff's defenses would hold. The refuge had become a fortress. But even fortresses fall. The gymnasium at Ashford High had become a fortress of desperation. Tables and chairs were stacked against doors, bleachers braced with chains, and deputies patrolled the perimeter with rifles at the ready. The air was thick with sweat, fear, and the faint metallic tang of blood from the man Sheriff Daniels had put down only minutes earlier. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the scene live over WZAP. Ashford, the high school gym is holding. For now, Sheriff Daniels has organized the survivors, but the dead are at the doors, and the tension inside is unbearable. Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her eyes locked on the monitors. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the moans bleeding through the sheriff's radio. Inside the gym, the survivors huddled together, whispering prayers, clutching children. Every thud against the barricades made them flinch. The sound of the dead was constant now, low, guttural moans, punctuated by the scrape of nails against metal. Sheriff Daniels strode to the center of the gym, her voice firm. "Stay calm. They can't get in, not if we hold." But even as she spoke, a crash echoed from the east wing. The barricade shuddered. Screams erupted. Jack's voice sharpened. "We're hearing reports of movement at the east wing doors. The dead are testing the barricades." Deputies rushed to reinforce the entrance, shoving more tables against it. The pounding grew louder, more frantic. The doors groaned under the pressure. Then came the sound no one wanted to hear. The splinter of wood, the screech of metal. The barricade gave way. The doors burst open and the dead poured in. Figures staggered through the breach, their eyes clouded, their mouths opening in guttural moans. Blood smeared their faces, their clothes torn and soaked. They moved with terrifying hunger, clawing at anything alive. The gym erupted in chaos. Parents screamed, dragging children toward the bleachers. Deputies opened fire, the blasts of shotguns echoing through the rafters. Bodies fell, but more surged forward, climbing over their fallen. Jack's voice carried the horror live. "Ashford, the gym has been breached. The dead are inside. Gunfire is erupting. Survivors are fleeing." Claire's hands shook as she adjusted the levels, the screams and gunfire filling the studio. Tyler ripped off his headphones, his face pale. "We can't air this. It's too much." Jack's jaw tightened. People need to know. They need to hear the truth. Inside the gym, Sheriff Daniels fired her shotgun, each blast dropping another corpse. "Hold the line! Push them back!" she shouted. But the line was breaking. A teenage boy tripped, his candy-stained costume torn. A corpse lunged, dragging him down, his screams cut short in a spray of blood. His mother shrieked, clawing at deputies to save him, but it was too late. The dead pressed closer, their moans deafening. Survivors scrambled up the bleachers, hurling chairs and bags in desperation. The gym floor became a battlefield, slick with blood. Jack's voice cracked for the first time. "We're hearing children screaming, families torn apart. The sheriff is holding the line, but the dead are inside. Ashford, this is no longer a refuge. The gym is falling." Claire whispered, "God help them." Sheriff Daniels barked orders, her voice raw. "Fall back to the west doors. Move, move." Deputies formed a line, firing as they retreated, buying precious seconds for survivors to escape. The gym shook with chaos. Gunfire, screams, the relentless moans of the dead. Dylan Carter's camera feed flickered back on, shaky and blood-spattered. He had made it inside the gym, filming the carnage. His voice was hoarse. "This is Dylan Carter. The gym is overrun. They're everywhere. If you're watching this, Don't come here, don't. The feed cut to static. Jack leaned into the mic, his voice heavy with finality. Ashford, the first breach has happened. The gym is no longer safe. Survivors are fleeing into the night. If you're listening, do not go to the school. Find shelter. Barricade. Pray. The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. Outside, the dead feasted in the gymnasium. Inside the station, the broadcast carried their screams into every home. The refuge had fallen. The gymnasium reeked of gunpowder and blood. Smoke still hung in the rafters, drifting above the carnage left by the breach. Bodies, both living and dead, lay scattered across the polished floor. Survivors huddled in corners, clutching children, whispering prayers. The Halloween decorations that had once seemed festive now fluttered like cruel reminders of innocence lost. Sheriff Ruth Daniels stood at the center of it all, her shotgun still warm in her hands. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with grime, but her voice carried authority. "Listen up!" she barked, cutting through the sobs and murmurs. "The gym is compromised. We can't hold here. If we stay, we die." Jack Reynolds' voice carried her words live over WZAP. "Ashford, you're hearing this as it happens. Sheriff Daniels is rallying the survivors. The gym is no longer safe." Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her eyes locked on the monitors. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the chaos bleed through the sheriff's radio. Ruth continued, her tone firm. "There's one place left, the National Guard checkpoint on Route 17. They've got barricades, heavy weapons, and supplies. If we can reach it, we've got a chance." A murmur rippled through the survivors. Some clung to the idea of safety. Others shook their heads in disbelief. One man shouted, "It's suicide! The streets are crawling with them!" Ruth's eyes blazed. "It's suicide if we stay. You saw what happened here. They'll keep coming until there's nothing left. The guard is our only shot." Jack's voice narrated the moment for listeners. "The sheriff is proposing an evacuation. Survivors will attempt to reach the guard checkpoint. It's a desperate gamble, but perhaps the only one left." Dylan Carter's camera flickered back to life, shaky but functional. His voice was hoarse. "This is Dylan Carter. I'm inside the gym. You can see the survivors, bloodied, terrified, but listening. The sheriff's plan is clear. Move west or die here." The camera panned across faces. Mothers clutching children, teenagers gripping baseball bats, elderly residents leaning on canes. Fear was etched into every line, but so was determination. Ruth raised her shotgun, her voice steady. "We move in convoy. Families in the center, armed men and women on the outside. We stick together. No one runs, no one hides. If you fall behind, you're gone. Do you understand?" A chorus of reluctant nods followed. Jack's voice carried the weight of the decision. "Ashford, the survivors are preparing to leave the gym. They're heading for the checkpoint. If you're listening and can move safely, this may be your last chance." Claire whispered to Jack, "If they don't make it..." Jack's jaw tightened. Then the whole town is lost. The sheriff's deputies began organizing the crowd, handing out what weapons they had. Shotguns, pistols, even baseball bats and crowbars. Volunteers dragged the barricades from the west doors, clearing a path. The moans outside grew louder, as if the dead sensed what was coming. Ruth turned to Dylan's camera, her face grim. "If anyone sees this, know that Ashford fought. We didn't just wait to die. We moved." The survivors gathered, clutching their makeshift weapons, their eyes fixed on the doors. The air was thick with fear, but also with resolve. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with finality. "Ashford, the sheriff has made her plan. The survivors will march west toward the guard checkpoint. It is a march through hell itself, but it is the only path left." The deputies threw open the doors. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the distant moans of the horde. Survivors flinched, but Ruth raised her shotgun high. "Move!" she shouted. The convoy surged forward, spilling into the night. Dylan's camera caught the moment. The line of survivors marching west, their silhouettes framed by the burning gym behind them. His voice trembled. This is it. The last march of Ashford. The feed crackled, then steadied. Jack's voice carried over the airwaves, calm but grim. Ashford, the sheriff's plan is in motion. The survivors are leaving the gym. Their fate, and perhaps ours, will be decided on the road to Route 17. The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. The plan was set. The march had begun. The convoy moved west under a bruised October sky, the survivors of Ashford marching in a ragged line along Route 17. Sheriff Ruth Daniels led from the front, her shotgun slung across her chest, her deputies flanking the column. Behind them shuffled families clutching children, elderly residents leaning on canes, teenagers gripping baseball bats and crowbars. The air was cold, the night heavy with silence broken only by the crunch of gravel underfoot. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the march live over WZAP. Ashford, the survivors are on the move. Sheriff Daniels is leading them toward the National Guard checkpoint. They're walking Route 17, a road that tonight feels more like a gauntlet than a path to safety. Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her eyes darting between the monitors. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the sheriff's radio chatter. Dylan Carter's camera streamed from the middle of the convoy, shaky but steady enough to capture the grim procession. His voice was hoarse. "This is Dylan Carter. We're on Route 17. The town is behind us, burning. Ahead, maybe salvation. But the road is long, and the dead are everywhere." The survivors trudged past abandoned cars, their headlights still glowing faintly. Candy bags lay scattered across the asphalt, dropped by children hours earlier. A jack-o'-lantern sat smashed on the shoulder, its grin twisted into something grotesque. The first moan came from the tree line. Heads snapped towards the sound. Shadows moved between the trees, pale faces glinting in the moonlight. The dead emerged slowly at first, then in greater numbers staggering onto the road. "Hold the line," Ruth barked. Deputies raised rifles, firing into the horde. Bullets cracked, skulls burst, bodies collapsed. But more came, pouring from the woods, drawn by the noise. Jack's voice sharpened. "Ashford, the convoy is under attack. The dead are on Route 17. Gunfire is erupting. Survivors are fighting for their lives." The column faltered. Families screamed, clutching children. A man swung a crowbar wildly, caving in a skull. A teenager hurled a rock, missing entirely. The dead pressed closer, their moans rising into a chorus of hunger. Dylan's camera shook as he ducked behind a car. "They're everywhere. The road is blocked." The convoy ground to a halt. Ahead, a pile-up of cars stretched across the highway, twisted metal forming an impassable barricade. The dead swarmed over it, clawing, moaning, their eyes fixed on the living. Ruth's voice cut through the chaos. "Form a circle, protect the families." Deputies and armed civilians obeyed, forming a perimeter around the children and elderly. Gunfire erupted again, muzzle flashes lighting the night. But the dead kept coming. A woman screamed as her husband was dragged down, teeth sinking into his throat. Blood sprayed across the asphalt. She tried to pull him back, but a deputy yanked her away. "He's gone! Move!" Jack's voice cracked, but he forced it steady. "Ashford, you're hearing it live. The convoy is surrounded. The dead are pressing from all sides. The sheriff is holding the line, but the road is a killing ground." Tyler ripped off his headphones, his face pale. "They're not going to make it." Claire's voice was tight. "Don't say that." On Route 17, Ruth fired her shotgun, each blast dropping another corpse. "Keep moving! Push through!" she shouted, but the pile-up ahead was impenetrable. The only way was back, or through the dead. Dylan's camera caught the moment a deputy fell, dragged, screaming into the horde. His rifle clattered to the ground, snatched up by a teenager who fired wildly, tears streaming down his face. The circle shrank, the dead pressed closer, their moans deafening. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with dread. "Ashford, the highway is lost. The survivors are trapped. The sheriff is fighting, but the dead are too many." Then, faint but clear, came the sound of engines. Headlights flared in the distance. A Humvee roared down the road, its mounted gun blazing. The dead were mowed down in sprays of gore, bodies collapsing in heaps. The convoy erupted in cheers. Ruth raised her shotgun high, signaling. The Humvee skidded to a halt, soldiers shouting, "Get in! Move!" The survivors surged forward, scrambling into the vehicles. Dylan's camera caught the moment, his voice trembling. "The guard is here. We're saved. For now." Jack's voice carried the relief live. "Ashford, the convoy has been rescued. The guard has arrived. The survivors are moving again." The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. The highway had become a graveyard, but the march continued. The convoy rattled off Route 17, guided by the National Guard Humvee's headlights. The soldiers had promised to escort them to the checkpoint, but the road ahead was clogged with wreckage. Instead, they diverted down a rural lane, the cracked asphalt winding between cornfields blackened by frost. At the end of the road stood a weather-worn farmhouse, its windows dark, its porch sagging under years of neglect. Sheriff Ruth Daniels raised her hand, signaling a halt. "We'll hole up here until dawn. The guard can't push through tonight." Jack Reynolds' voice carried the decision live over WZAP. "Ashford, the survivors have taken refuge in a farmhouse off Route 17. Sheriff Daniels is organizing a defense. The night is far from over." Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her eyes darting to the monitors. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the soldiers' radio chatter. Inside the farmhouse, survivors spread out, dragging furniture against doors and windows. The smell of dust and mildew filled the air. Children huddled in corners, clutching blankets. Soldiers checked their weapons, their faces grim. Dylan Carter's camera flickered on, capturing the scene. His voice was hoarse. "This is Dylan Carter. We've reached a farmhouse. Survivors are fortifying it. The sheriff says we'll hold until morning, but the dead are close. You can hear them." And indeed, faint moans drifted across the fields, carried on the wind. Ruth moved through the rooms, barking orders. "Cover the windows. Block the stairs. Keep the lights low." She paused at the front door, her shotgun resting against her shoulder. "We make our stand here." Jack's voice narrated the moment. The farmhouse has become a fortress. Survivors are barricading every entrance. The sheriff is determined to hold until dawn. The first thud came minutes later. A body slammed against the porch, rattling the boards. Then another. The moans grew louder, closer. Shadows moved in the fields, dozens of them staggering towards the house. "Positions!" Ruth shouted. Deputies and soldiers raised rifles, aiming through cracks in the barricades. The dead hit the house like a storm. Fists pounded on doors, nails scraped against windows. Glass shattered, boards splintered. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting the darkened rooms. Jack's voice carried the chaos live. "Ashford, the farmhouse is under siege. The dead are at the doors. Gunfire is erupting. Survivors are fighting for their lives." Dylan's camera shook as he ducked behind a couch. "They're everywhere. The windows. They're breaking through." A corpse crashed through the kitchen window, its face smeared with blood. A soldier fired point blank, the blast echoing through the house. The body collapsed, but more pressed in, clawing through the shattered frame. Children screamed. Parents swung bats and knives, desperation in their eyes. The farmhouse shook with the pounding of the dead. Ruth fired her shotgun, each blast dropping another corpse. "Hold the line. Don't let them in." But the line was breaking. A deputy screamed as he was dragged through a window, his body disappearing into the horde. His rifle clattered to the floor, snatched up by a teenager who fired wildly, tears streaming down his face. Jack's voice cracked, but he forced it steady. "Ashford, you're hearing it live. The farmhouse is surrounded, the dead are inside, the survivors are fighting, but the night is long." Claire whispered, "How much longer can they hold?" Jack didn't answer. Inside the farmhouse, Dylan's camera caught a mother shielding her child as a corpse lunged. A soldier tackled it, firing into its skull. Blood sprayed across the walls. The mother sobbed, clutching her child tighter. The dead pressed closer, their moans deafening. The barricades groaned under the weight. Ruth's voice rang out, fierce and unyielding. "We hold until dawn. We don't break." The survivors roared with her, their voices defiant. They fought with everything they had, blades flashing, guns firing, fists swinging. The farmhouse shook, but it stood. Jack's voice carried the moment live. "Ashford, the siege continues. The dead are relentless, but the survivors are still fighting. As long as they draw breath, they will not surrender." The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. The farmhouse had become a battlefield, and the night was far from over. The farmhouse groaned under the weight of the siege. Every window was boarded, every door barricaded, but the pounding of the dead never ceased. Their moans seeped through the walls, a constant reminder that the survivors were trapped in a coffin of wood and nails. Inside, the air was thick with fear. Families huddled in corners, children sobbing quietly into their parents' arms. Soldiers and deputies reloaded weapons with trembling hands. The floor was slick with blood from earlier breaches, the smell of gunpowder and rot mingling in the stale air. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the tension live over WZAP. "Ashford, the farmhouse is holding for now, but the survivors are exhausted, supplies are low, and fear is spreading faster than the infection." Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her eyes darting to the monitors. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the sheriff's radio chatter. Sheriff Ruth Daniels stood at the center of the room, her shotgun resting against her shoulder. Her voice was firm, but her eyes betrayed fatigue. "We hold until dawn. Reinforcements will come. We just have to last a few more hours." But not everyone believed her. In the corner, a man named Frank Heller paced nervously. His wife clutched their teenage son, her eyes wide with terror. Frank's voice was sharp, desperate. "We can't stay here. We're sitting ducks. We need to run while we still can." Ruth turned to him, her tone cold. "Run where? The fields are crawling with them. You step outside, you're dead." Frank shook his head violently. No, I saw a truck out back. If we can get to it, we can drive out. We don't need to wait for the guard. We don't need to die here." Murmurs rippled through the survivors. Some nodded, fear gnawing at their resolve. Others shook their heads, clinging to the sheriff's authority. Jack's voice narrated the fracture. "Ashford, fear is dividing the survivors. Some want to hold. Others want to flee. The unity that kept them alive is cracking." Dylan Carter's camera swung toward Frank, capturing his wild eyes, his trembling hands. "This is Dylan Carter. Tensions are boiling inside the farmhouse. One man is demanding escape, even as the dead pound at the doors." Ruth stepped closer, her voice low but fierce. "If you open that door, you doom us all. You let them in." Frank's face twisted with desperation. Better to take a chance than wait to die. Before anyone could stop him, Frank lunged for the barricade. He shoved aside chairs and tables, his hands clawing at the locks. His wife screamed, "Frank, no!" The door burst open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the stench of decay. Shadows lurched forward, pale faces glinting in the moonlight. The dead poured through the breach, moaning, clawing, their hunger unleashed. Chaos erupted. Survivors screamed, scrambling back. Deputies fired, muzzle flashes lighting the room. Bodies fell, but more surged forward, climbing over their fallen. Jack's voice cracked, but he forced it steady. Ashford, the farmhouse has been breached. A man opened the door. The dead are inside. Survivors are fighting, but the line is breaking. Frank's wife shrieked as he was dragged down, teeth sinking into his throat. Blood sprayed across the floor. His son screamed, clawing at deputies to save him, but it was too late. Ruth fired her shotgun, each blast dropping another corpse. "Hold the line! Push them back!" she shouted. But the damage was done. The dead were inside. Dylan's camera shook violently as he ducked behind a table. His voice was hoarse. "This is Dylan Carter. The farmhouse is falling. One man's fear opened the door, and now we're paying the price." The survivors fought with everything they had, blades flashing, guns firing, fists swinging. But the dead pressed closer, their moans deafening. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with finality. "Ashford, betrayal has doomed the farmhouse. The survivors are scattering. The sheriff is fighting, but the dead are too many." The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. Inside the farmhouse, trust had shattered. And with it, their last refuge. The farmhouse was gone, swallowed by the dead. Survivors staggered westward under the pale moonlight, their faces streaked with blood and ash. Sheriff Ruth Daniels led them down the cracked highway, her shotgun slung across her chest, her voice hoarse from shouting. Behind her, families clutched children, soldiers carried the wounded, and Dylan Carter's camera captured every step. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the march live over WZAP. "Ashford, the survivors are moving again. The farmhouse has fallen. Sheriff Daniels is leading them toward the National Guard checkpoint. It may be their last hope." Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her eyes darting to the monitors. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the soldiers' radio chatter. The convoy crested a hill, and there it was, the checkpoint. Floodlights blazed against the night, illuminating sandbags, barbed wire and armored vehicles. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, rifles at the ready. For a moment, hope surged through the survivors. Dylan's voice trembled with relief. "This is Dylan Carter. We've reached the checkpoint. The guard is here. We're safe." But as they drew closer, the illusion cracked. The checkpoint was chaos. Soldiers shouted orders, their voices drowned by the moans of the dead pressing against the outer barricades. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting the night. The air reeked of smoke and blood. A sergeant waved frantically. "Get inside! Move!" The survivors surged forward, stumbling through the gates. Soldiers slammed them shut behind, welding them with sparks. The dead clawed at the metal, their moans rising into a deafening chorus. Inside the checkpoint was a war zone. Wounded soldiers lay on stretchers, medics working frantically. Civilians huddled in corners, their faces pale with fear. The ground was littered with spent casings, the air thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder. Sheriff Daniels strode to the command tent, her voice sharp. "What's the situation?" The sergeant's face was grim. "Bad. We've been holding since sundown, but they keep coming. We're running low on ammo, low on food, reinforcements aren't coming." Ruth's jaw tightened. "Then we hold until dawn." Jack's voice carried the exchange live. "Ashford, the checkpoint is not the salvation we hoped for. The guard is exhausted, their supplies dwindling. They are fighting to hold the line, but the dead are relentless." Dylan's camera panned across the scene. Soldiers firing from sandbags, civilians sobbing in the shadows, medics shouting for more bandages. His voice was hoarse. This isn't a refuge, it's a last stand. The pounding on the gates grew louder. Metal groaned under the weight. Soldiers shouted, firing into the horde. The dead pressed closer, their moans deafening. Tyler ripped off his headphones, his face pale. "They're not gonna hold." Claire's voice was tight. "Don't say that." Inside the checkpoint, Ruth rallied the survivors. "Grab weapons. Help the guard. If we fall here, there's nowhere else to run." Parents handed children to medics, then picked up rifles. Teenagers gripped crowbars, their faces pale but determined. The survivors joined the line, fighting shoulder to shoulder with soldiers. Jack's voice carried the moment live. "Ashford, the survivors are fighting alongside the guard. This is no longer just a checkpoint. It is the front line of America's survival." Gunfire roared. The gates shook. The dead pressed closer. Dylan's camera caught a soldier collapsing, his chest torn open. Another took his place, firing until his rifle clicked empty. He drew a knife, slashing wildly as the dead clawed at him. The sergeant shouted, "Fall back to the inner line." The survivors retreated, dragging the wounded. The dead poured through the outer barricade, their moans filling the night. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with dread. "Ashford, the checkpoint is breaking. The guard is falling back. The dead are inside." The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding dot. The checkpoint had been their last hope dot. Now it was their last stand. The checkpoint's floodlights flickered against the night, casting long shadows across sandbags and razor wire. Gunfire rattled in bursts, echoing off the highway. The dead pressed against the barricades in waves, their moans rising into a deafening chorus. Inside, the survivors huddled behind soldiers, clutching children, gripping scavenged weapons. The air reeked of smoke, sweat, and fear. Medics shouted for more bandages, their voices drowned by the roar of rifles. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the chaos live over WZAP. "Ashford, the checkpoint is breaking. The guard is firing, but the dead are too many. The survivors are trapped inside the wire." Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her hands trembling. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the soldiers' frantic radio chatter. Sheriff Ruth Daniels stood at the front line, her shotgun booming with each blast. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with grime, but her voice carried authority. "Hold the line! Don't let them through!" But the line was breaking. The outer barricade collapsed under the weight of the horde. Dead poured through the breach, clawing, moaning, their hunger unleashed. Soldiers fell back, firing desperately. The ground was slick with blood. Dylan Carter's camera shook as he ducked behind a Humvee. His voice was hoarse. "This is Dylan Carter. The checkpoint is overrun. The dead are inside. Soldiers are falling. Survivors are scattering." The camera panned across the chaos. Families screaming, soldiers firing until their rifles clicked empty, deputies swinging batons and knives. The dead pressed closer, their moans deafening. Jack's voice cracked, but he forced it steady. "Ashford, you're hearing it live. The guard is collapsing. The survivors are fighting, but the checkpoint is falling." A soldier shouted, "Fall back to the command tent." The survivors surged towards the center, dragging the wounded. The dead followed, relentless. Ruth's eyes blazed. She turned to Dylan's camera, her voice fierce. "Get them out! Get them west! I'll hold the line!" Dylan's voice trembled. "Sheriff, you can't." But Ruth was already moving. She climbed onto a Humvee, shotgun in hand, her silhouette framed by floodlights. She fired into the horde, each blast dropping another corpse. Her voice rang out, raw and unyielding. "Ashford, we don't run, we fight." The survivors roared with her, their voices defiant. But Ruth knew the truth. This was her last stand. The dead swarmed the Humvee, clawing at her boots. She fired again and again until her shotgun clicked empty. She drew her sidearm, firing into the mass. Her voice carried over the chaos. "Go, now!" Jack's voice dropped, heavy with grief. "Ashford, Sheriff Ruth Daniels is making her stand. She is buying time for the survivors. She is not leaving." Claire whispered, "She's sacrificing herself." Tyler's eyes filled with tears. "She's saving them." Dylan's camera caught the moment. The sheriff surrounded, firing until the dead dragged her down. Her shotgun clattered to the ground, her voice silenced. The survivors fled through the inner gate, soldiers covering their retreat. The dead swarmed the checkpoint, tearing through sandbags, overturning vehicles, devouring the fallen. Jack's voice carried the moment live. "Ashford, the checkpoint has fallen. Sheriff Daniels is gone. The survivors are fleeing west. The dead have taken everything." The floodlights flickered, then died. The night swallowed the checkpoint whole. The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. The last line of defense was gone. And with it, Ashford's hope. The survivors stumbled westward from the ruins of the checkpoint, their faces hollow with exhaustion and grief. Behind them, the floodlights had gone dark, swallowed by the tide of the dead. Ahead, the night stretched wide and empty, broken only by the faint whistle of a train. Sheriff Ruth Daniels was gone, her sacrifice etched into every survivor's memory, but her command still echoed in their ears. "Go west. Don't stop." Jack Reynolds' voice carried the march live over WZAP. "Ashford, the checkpoint has fallen. Sheriff Daniels is gone, but the survivors are still moving. They've heard the whistle of a train, perhaps their last chance." Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her eyes darting to the monitors. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the faint rumble of wheels on tracks. Dylan Carter's camera flickered on, capturing the survivors as they reached the railway line. His voice was hoarse. "This is Dylan Carter. We found it. The evacuation train. The last train out of Ashford." The train loomed in the darkness, its cars battered but intact. Soldiers waved from the platform, shouting for survivors to board. The engine hissed, steam rising into the night. Hope surged through the survivors. Parents clutched children tighter. Teenagers gripped weapons. Elderly residents wept with relief. They surged forward, scrambling onto the cars. Jack's voice carried the moment live. "Ashford, the survivors are boarding the train. This may be their salvation. The last train out of Ashford is leaving tonight." But the dead were not far behind. Moans drifted across the fields, growing louder. Shadows moved in the distance, staggering toward the tracks. The horde had followed. "Move!" a soldier shouted. "Get them on board!" The survivors scrambled faster, climbing into the cars. Soldiers fired into the darkness, muzzle flashes lighting the night. Bodies fell, but more pressed forward, their moans rising into a chorus of hunger. Dylan's camera shook as he climbed aboard, capturing the chaos. "They're coming! The dead are on the tracks!" The train whistle blew, long and mournful. The engine roared, wheels grinding against steel. The train lurched forward, slowly at first, then faster. Survivors clung to each other, their faces pale with fear and hope. Jack's voice carried the moment live. "Ashford, the train is moving. The survivors are leaving. The dead are at their heels, but the train is pulling away." But the dead were relentless. They swarmed the platform, clawing at the cars, dragging themselves onto the steps. Soldiers fired point blank, kicking bodies back onto the tracks. A woman screamed as a corpse grabbed her ankle, pulling her down. A soldier yanked her free, firing into the ghoul's skull. The train picked up speed, the platform vanishing into the night. But the dead clung to the cars, their fingers hooked into metal, their moans filling the air. Survivors swung bats and crowbars, smashing hands, prying them loose. Dylan's camera caught the moment. A teenager swinging a crowbar, his face twisted with terror, as a corpse clawed at the window. He smashed its skull, blood spraying across the glass. His voice cracked. We're not safe. Not yet. Inside the cars, survivors huddled together, their eyes wide. The train rattled westward, its wheels screaming against the tracks. The night outside was a blur of shadows and fire. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with gravity. Ashford, the survivors are on the move. The train is their lifeline, but the dead are relentless. Even now they cling to the cars. This is not salvation, this is escape. For now. The whistle blew again, echoing across the night. The train roared into the darkness, carrying the last survivors of Ashford away from the ruins of their town. The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding dot. The last train out of Ashford was moving dot, but the dead were not far behind dot. The train thundered westward through the Ohio night, its wheels screaming against the rails. Inside the cars, survivors huddled together, their faces pale in the flickering light. The rhythmic clatter of steel on steel should have been comforting, but instead it carried a grim reminder they were running, not escaping. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the scene live over WZAP. Ashford, the survivors are aboard the evacuation train. They've left the town behind, but the dead are not far. The train is moving, but fear rides with them. Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her eyes darting to the monitors. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the soldiers' radio chatter. Dylan Carter's camera flickered on, capturing the survivors inside the cars. His voice was hoarse. "This is Dylan Carter, we're on the train. Families are huddled together, soldiers are on edge, and everyone is waiting for the next attack." The car was crowded, the air thick with sweat and fear. Parents clutched children, teenagers gripped weapons, elderly residents sat trembling. Soldiers patrolled the aisles, their rifles slung across their chests. But beneath the surface, paranoia spread. A woman whispered to her neighbor, her voice trembling. "He's been sweating since we boarded. Look at him, he's hiding something." The neighbor glanced at a man slumped in the corner, his sleeve pulled low over his arm. His face was pale, his eyes glassy. Jack's voice carried the tension live. "Ashford, suspicion is spreading inside the train. Survivors are whispering about hidden bites. Fear is tearing at their unity." The whispers grew louder. A soldier approached the man, his voice sharp. "Show me your arm." The man shook his head violently. "I'm fine, just tired." The soldier's eyes narrowed. "Show me." The man's wife clutched his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't. He's fine." But the soldier yanked back the sleeve. The bite mark was deep, ragged, already blackening. The car erupted in screams. The man convulsed, his body jerking violently. His eyes rolled back, then snapped open, clouded, lifeless, and he lunged, teeth snapping. Chaos erupted. Survivors scrambled back, pressing against the walls. Soldiers fired, the blast echoing through the car. The man collapsed, his body twitching. Jack's voice cracked, but he forced it steady. "Ashford, you just heard it." A man turned inside the train. Soldiers put him down before he could spread it further. But the fear remains. "Who else is hiding a bite?" Claire whispered. "They're tearing themselves apart." Tyler's voice trembled. "It's not just the dead outside. It's the fear inside." Dylan's camera shook as he captured the aftermath. The man's wife sobbed over his body, soldiers dragging her away. Survivors stared at each other with suspicion, their eyes darting to sleeves, collars, shadows. The train rattled on, its whistle echoing across the night. But inside, unity was gone. Jack's voice carried the moment live. "Ashford, the survivors are no longer just fighting the dead. They're fighting fear, suspicion, and each other. The train is moving, but the danger is inside as much as out." A soldier shouted from the next car, "They're on the roof!" The survivors froze. The sound of pounding echoed overhead, claws scraping against metal. The dead had clung to the train, riding with them. Gunfire erupted, soldiers firing through the roof. The train shook, sparks flying as bodies tumbled from the cars. Survivors screamed, clutching children tighter. Dylan's camera caught the moment. A corpse crashing through a skylight, landing in the aisle. It lunged, teeth snapping, before a soldier shot it point blank. Blood sprayed across the seats. The car erupted in chaos again. Survivors swung bats and knives, soldiers fired, the dead clawed and moaned. The train became a battlefield on wheels. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with gravity. Ashford, the train is under attack. The dead are on the roof, inside the cars. The survivors are fighting, but the night is long. The whistle blew again, long and mournful. The train roared into the darkness, carrying the last survivors of Ashford westward. The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. Dot. The train was moving, Dot, but nowhere was safe. Dot. The train roared westward, its whistle echoing across the night. Survivors clung to each other inside the rattling cars, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. The dead had been pried from the roof, their bodies tumbling into the darkness, but the reprieve was short-lived. Ahead, the tracks ended in ruin. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the moment live over WZAP. Ashford, the train is slowing. The tracks ahead are damaged. The survivors are approaching a bridge, collapsed, broken. Their path is blocked. Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her eyes darting to the monitors. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the soldiers' frantic chatter. Dylan Carter's camera flickered on, capturing the scene as the train screeched to a halt. His voice was hoarse. "This is Dylan Carter. The bridge is gone. The tracks are twisted. The span collapsed into the river. We can't go forward." The survivors poured from the cars, stumbling onto the tracks. The night air was cold, the river below roaring in the darkness. The bridge stretched ahead, broken in the middle, its steel beams twisted like bones. Sheriff Ruth Daniels was gone, but her deputies carried her spirit. One of them, Deputy Harris, raised his rifle, his voice sharp. "We hold here, we make a stand." But the moans were already rising. From the east, shadows staggered onto the tracks. Dozens of them, then hundreds, their pale faces glinting in the moonlight. The horde had followed the train. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with gravity. "Ashford, the dead are here. The survivors are trapped at the bridge. There is no way forward. Only fire can hold them back." The soldiers moved quickly, dragging fuel cars to the edge of the bridge. They smashed valves, gasoline spilling across the tracks, the stench filling the air. Survivors tore cloth into rags, dipping them into the fuel, fashioning torches. Dylan's camera shook as he captured the preparations. "They're going to burn it. They're going to set the bridge on fire." The moans grew louder, closer. The dead pressed forward, their eyes fixed on the living. Deputy Harris raised his torch, his face grim. "Light it!" Flames roared to life, racing across the tracks. The night exploded in fire, the bridge engulfed in an inferno. The heat was intense, the flames crackling, the smoke rising into the sky. The dead staggered into the fire, their bodies igniting, their moans turning to shrieks. They burned, collapsing into ash, but more pressed forward, climbing over the fallen. Jack's voice carried the moment live. "Ashford, the bridge is burning. The survivors have set the tracks ablaze. The dead are walking into the fire, but they keep coming." The survivors fought with everything they had. Soldiers fired into the horde, muzzle flashes lighting the flames. Parents swung bats, teenagers hurled rocks, elderly residents clutched knives. The fire roared, but the dead pressed closer. Dylan's camera caught the moment. A corpse, its body aflame, lunging through the fire, clawing at a soldier. The soldier screamed, shoving it back into the blaze. His uniform caught fire, and others rushed to smother the flames. The bridge shook under the weight of the horde. Steel groaned, wood cracked, the fire consuming everything. Jack's voice cracked, but he forced it steady. Ashford, the survivors are standing on a burning bridge. They are fighting with fire, with bullets, with their bare hands. This is not survival, this is defiance. The flames spread, racing across the bridge, consuming the fuel cars. Explosions rocked the night, fireballs lighting the sky. The dead shrieked, their bodies torn apart by the blasts. The survivors fell back, retreating to the far side of the bridge. The fire raged behind them, the horde consumed in the inferno. Dylan's voice trembled. We've done it. The bridge is gone, the dead are burning. But so is our future. The tracks are destroyed. There's no way forward. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with finality. Ashford, the bridge is gone. The survivors are alive, but their path is burned. They've bought time, but at a terrible cost. The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. The bridge was fire dot, and the night was not yet over. The survivors stood on the far side of the burning bridge, their faces lit by the inferno behind them. The flames roared, consuming steel and wood, the night sky painted orange with fire. The dead shrieked as they burned, their bodies collapsing into ash. But even as the bridge fell, the moans continued. The horde was not gone. It never would be. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the moment live over WZAP. Ashford, the bridge is fire. The survivors are alive, but they are surrounded. The dead are closing in from every side. This may be the end. Claire Monroe adjusted the feed, her hands trembling. Tyler sat pale and silent, headphones clamped over his ears, listening to the soldiers' frantic chatter. Dylan Carter's camera flickered on, capturing the survivors as they regrouped. His voice was hoarse. This is Dylan Carter. We've made it across the bridge, but the dead are still coming. We're trapped. There's nowhere left to run. The survivors huddled together, their weapons clutched tight. Parents held children close. Teenagers gripped bats and knives. Elderly residents stood with grim resolve. Soldiers checked their rifles, their faces pale but determined. Deputy Harris raised his voice, sharp and commanding. This is it. We hold here. We fight until the end. The survivors nodded, their fear replaced by grim determination. They formed a circle, weapons raised, their backs to the fire. The moans grew louder, closer. Shadows staggered into view, dozens of them, then hundreds, their pale faces glinting in the firelight. Jack's voice dropped, heavy with gravity. Ashford, the survivors are making their last stand. They are surrounded. The dead are closing in, but they will not run. They will not surrender. The first corpse lunged, its body aflame, its mouth opening in a guttural moan. A soldier fired, the blast echoing across the night. The body collapsed, but more surged forward, clawing, moaning, their hunger unleashed. The circle erupted in chaos. Survivors swung bats and knives, soldiers fired rifles, parents shielded children. The dead pressed closer, their moans deafening. Dylan's camera shook as he ducked behind a soldier. His voice trembled. They're everywhere, the circle is breaking, this is the end. But Jack's voice carried over the chaos, calm and steady. Ashford, if you can hear me, stay with us. Don't look away. These are your neighbours, your friends, your family. They are fighting for every breath. They are fighting for you. Claire whispered, Jack, we can't keep broadcasting, the power. Jack cut her off, his voice firm. We don't stop, not now, not ever. The dead pressed closer, their claws scraping against flesh, their teeth snapping. Survivors screamed, soldiers shouted, the night filled with gunfire and blood. Deputy Harris roared, his voice defiant. Hold the line, don't let them through. The survivors fought with everything they had. A teenager swung a crowbar, caving in a skull. A mother stabbed with a kitchen knife, her face twisted with rage. An elderly man swung a cane, his voice hoarse with defiance. But the dead kept coming. Jack's voice cracked, but he forced it steady. Ashford, this is our last broadcast. The survivors are surrounded. The dead are inside the circle. But they are still fighting. They will not go quietly. Dylan's camera caught the moment. A soldier dragged a wounded child into the center, shielding her with his body as the dead closed in. His rifle clicked empty, and he drew a knife, slashing wildly. The fire roared behind them. The dead pressed closer, the circle shrinking. Jack leaned into the mic, his voice low but fierce. Stay with us. Don't look away. If this is the end, let it be heard. Let it be remembered. The on-air light glowed red, steady, and unyielding. The last stand had begun. The night had been endless. Fire, blood, and screams had filled every moment, the survivors fighting tooth and nail against the tide of the dead. But now, at last, the horizon shifted. A faint glow crept across the eastern sky, painting the clouds in shades of grey and gold. The first light of November first touched the battlefield. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the moment live over WZAP. His baritone was ragged, worn thin by hours of horror, but it still held steady. Ashford, the sun is rising. Dawn has come. We are still here. Claire Monroe sat slumped behind the glass, her eyes bloodshot, her hands trembling as she adjusted the feed. Tyler dozed fitfully in his chair, headphones still clamped over his ears, his face pale with exhaustion. The studio smelled of sweat and ozone, the air heavy with the weight of everything they had broadcast. On the far side of the burning bridge, the survivors stirred. Their circle had held through the night, though barely. Bodies, both living and dead, littered the ground. The fire had consumed most of the horde, their charred remains smouldering in the dawn light. The moans had faded, replaced by silence broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant rush of the river. Dylan Carter's camera flickered on, capturing the aftermath. His voice was hoarse, almost broken. This is Dylan Carter, it's morning. The dead. They're gone. Burned. Scattered. We're alive. Somehow we're alive. The camera panned across the survivors. Parents clutched children, their faces streaked with soot and tears. Teenagers sat slumped against the tracks, their weapons still in hand. Soldiers stood watch, their rifles lowered, their eyes hollow. The cost was written on every face. Deputy Harris, his uniform torn and bloodied, raised his voice. We made it. We held. Sheriff Daniels didn't die for nothing. The survivors murmured in agreement, their voices weak and resolute. They had endured the night. They had seen the dawn. Jack's voice carried the moment live. Ashford, the survivors have endured. The dead are gone. For now. The sun has risen on November 1st. A new day has come. Claire whispered. It feels unreal. Like the nightmare should still be going. Jack glanced at her, his eyes heavy. It is still going. Just slower now. Dylan's camera lingered on the horizon, the sun rising over the ruins of Ashford. Smoke curled into the sky, the town a silhouette of fire and ash. His voice trembled. This isn't victory, it's survival. But maybe that's enough. The survivors began to move, gathering what supplies they could. They carried the wounded, buried the dead, and prepared to march west once more. The tracks were gone, the bridge destroyed, but the road stretched ahead. Jack leaned into the mic, his voice low but firm. Ashford, if you can hear me, know this. We are not finished. We are bloodied, broken, but not finished. The dead may rise again, but so will we. The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. The first day of November had begun. The survivors were alive. But America had changed forever. The sun climbed higher over the horizon, burning away the shadows of Halloween night. The survivors moved westward, their footsteps slow but steady, the ruins of Ashford smouldering behind them. Smoke curled into the sky, a black scar against the pale November dawn. Jack Reynolds' voice carried the march live over WZAP. His baritone was ragged, worn thin by exhaustion, but it still held steady. Ashford, if you can hear me, we are still here. We are walking west. The town is gone, but we are not. Claire Monroe sat behind the glass, her eyes bloodshot, her hands trembling as she adjusted the feed. Tyler walked beside her, headphones still clamped over his ears, his face pale but resolute. The studio had become a lifeline, its signal carrying across the airwaves, connecting the broken pieces of a shattered town. Dylan Carter's camera flickered on, capturing the survivors as they trudged down the highway. His voice was hoarse, but steady. This is Dylan Carter. We're leaving Ashford behind. The dead took our homes, our families, our lives. But they didn't take our will. We're still moving. We're still alive. The camera panned across the survivors. Parents carried children, teenagers supported the elderly, soldiers limped with wounds still bleeding. Their faces were hollow, their eyes haunted, but their steps were steady. They had endured the night. They had seen the dawn. Jack's voice carried the moment live. Ashford, the survivors are walking west. They are leaving behind the ruins of their town, but they are carrying something greater. They are carrying hope. The road stretched ahead, empty and uncertain. The survivors did not know where it led, only that it led away from the dead. Dylan's camera lingered on the horizon, the sun rising over the fields. His voice trembled. This isn't just Ashford anymore. This is America. Every town, every city, every family will face what we faced. The dead are here. The world has changed. Jack leaned into the mic, his voice low but fierce. If you can hear me, know this. Ashford fought. We didn't surrender, we didn't hide, we stood, we bled, we burned, but we endured. And if we can endure, so can you. Claire whispered, Jack, people are listening, not just here, everywhere. And she was right. The broadcast had spread beyond Ashford. Across the country, radios crackled with Jack's voice. Televisions flickered with Dylan's footage. The world was watching. The world was listening. Jack's voice carried across the airwaves, steady and unyielding. Halloween 2025 was the night the dead returned, the night America changed forever. But it was also the night we learned what it means to fight, what it means to endure, what it means to be human. The survivors walked west, their silhouettes framed by the rising sun. Behind them, Ashford lay in ruins, a town consumed by fire and blood. Ahead, the road stretched into the unknown. Dylan's camera caught the final image. The survivors walking together, their shadows long against the pavement, their faces turned towards the light. His voice was steady, resolute. This is Dylan Carter, this is Ashford, this is America, and this is not the end. Jack leaned into the mic one last time, his voice carrying across the airwaves, across the country, across the world. Stay with us. Don't look away. This is the final broadcast of WZAP, Ashford, Ohio. Halloween 2025 was the night the dead returned, and America changed forever. The on-air light glowed red, steady and unyielding. Then it flickered and went dark.